Hi everyone, welcome back to this Let's Make video. This is the fourth part of the interaction tutorial. Today we're going to be going over a little bit on the UI interface. We're going to make this look a little bit better than just that kind of white block. And then we're going to actually create a quick child class. The child class for us is going to be a light switch. It'll turn on and off. We'll change out a material on it to signify whether it's on or off. And then we can create some event dispatchers so that it can be used in the level blueprint as well as other things. There's a couple ways to kind of create that interaction. We're just going to do it through the event dispatchers first, and then I'll show a little bit about creating blueprint interface stuff. Note that blueprint interfaces probably could have been used for a lot of this stuff. I chose not to. It really just depends on your project. For example, in here we have these functions that are add or remove, and these are functions that are just for our character. But if you have a lot of very different characters that are not based on each other for whatever reason, you can use the blueprint interfaces. You create events in those, and then you add them to your characters. For those who don't know, the blueprint interfaces, they're just really good at being used in all different classes. They can all be crazy different ideas. Like you could put an add interaction to a non-character. It could just be like a object in the world that for whatever reason might need to have the interaction code. So doing things that way, we'll go over a little bit of that as well when we get to the interface section. I chose not to do it just because I am focusing on creating parent and child classes for this tutorial. And it makes sense, especially if you can just take this as our interaction character, and if all your characters need that code, create children classes based off of that for your player, for your enemies, for your co-op, AI guys, your buddies, anything like that. So let's get started with this interaction UI. Just to remind everyone, when I jump into the game, I have access to the object when I look at it, and I can interact by pressing the E key. And I see the interactive text up on the upper left every time I hit the key. Right now it's running on those timers. You can change it back to the update function if you would like, but I'm going to keep it on this timer for now. We went over that last time. Let's go and open up our UI. So this UI widget we created before is just an image that's blank. And we have a canvas panel, an image, and that's it. But this really doesn't help us, especially when the player needs to not only know what they're interacting with, but what that kind of interaction will do. A good example is that light switch, where if the player walks up to it, they need to know if they're turning it on or off. Especially something like a light switch or something that may not have the material change that we will have, it might be really difficult to tell what that interaction will cause. So it's good to have text letting the player know. And we're going to layer that on the bottom. And we're also going to put a text piece right in the middle. So we can actually change out what key we want it to be shown much easier. So if you're not using the E key, you can use something else. The first thing I would like to do is create a better image. You can always use just a blank image like this and throw a letter on it. I did that for the original video. But I kind of want to show real quick how to create just a very quick image. If you haven't done it before, import it to the editor and get it in here for the UI. And a couple things that you may want to do in those settings. So we need to open up a program like Photoshop or Illustrator or GIMP or any of those free softwares as well. Anything that you can save out a Targa or a PNG or something like that. The editor has a big list of texture files it can import, and we just need to have access to something to create that. Now, I like using Illustrator because it's vector-based, especially for UI. That means that if I need to scale up my UI in any way, it makes it much, much easier. I'm not going to be losing quality on pixels. Everything is based on those vectors. We're going to go up to File and say New. And I'm going to create an image, and we can keep it pretty small. I'll bump it up to like 128, seems about right for this. And we can zoom out a little bit. Now I won't go over too much about Illustrator in general, but I just want to kind of show my workflow real quick. And the first thing we want to do is just throw in the button shape. I'm going to make this one round. You guys can make it whatever you'd like, square or rectangle or whatever you want this button to look like. If you're creating stuff for Xbox or PlayStation, they have very specific needs for what their buttons look like on screen. You kind of have to abide by their rules, so you would have to go and check out how those are set up. For us, though, we don't mind. We're just going to make a PC button for now. And now that I've added this circle in, I'm going to change its stroke to be, let's go with like a blue. Blue's fine. We're going to pop it up a little bit, and we're going to put it to the inside. Now, this white interior is really, really harsh, so I'm going to change it to something a little less harsh. Something like this is okay. Even darker would be alright. And you can go even further with all this. I'm not going to really play with the colors all that much. If you double click, you can open up this nice kind of color picker scale that they have. I'm going to desaturate it a little bit and click it again to add it. Now, this is very, very simple. This may need to be a little bit more saturated. Alright, and we just want to create some sort of background for our button. And this will work fine for us. We're not going to go into detail. I'm not going to add gradients or do anything crazy. We're just going to go up to File, and we're going to say Save for Web. And the nice thing about Illustrator is that we can do a PNG 24 transparency to get this in there very quickly. I actually don't know if this is the best method. This is just the fastest that I've found. It may be better to save space doing a different file type like a target or something. So feel free to save it out as whatever your needs are, and make sure that we have transparency. So if you're going to be doing a target in Photoshop, you'll have to put that transparency alpha in there and save it out. Now, back in Unreal, after we saved out our file, we can import it. So I'm going to go to the Import button and find it. Now I have it right here. I called it T button, and we're going to open up. And once we've added it in, you'll see it pops in right here. And the transparency kind of comes out as the color that's next to it, but that's fine. If we double click, you can see it's still there. And we want to do a few things for this texture. Inside our details, we need to, first off, change this to no maps. That will kind of take this UI and make it a little bit fuzzier and stuff as it loads in. But we don't want the UI to ever be lower resolution than what we currently have given it. We can change this to the UI texture group. And we want to go down to our texture. And in here we have an X and Y axis for tiling, and we never want it to tile. We're going to clamp both of these so that it doesn't ever go beyond these edges. And what that will do is just make sure that there's no bleeding from one side to the other. Especially if you have a lot on the edges that you have around here, it can bleed over a little bit, which we don't want. Now this should be good, so we can save it out and close this. Back in our UI, we're just going to change this image out for our newly imported texture. So I can go here, and we can say T underscore button. Compile save, and here it is. If we minimize, we can jump into our game, and you'll see that it doesn't quite line up. This is because our image has changed size. So let's go ahead and check out what our new size is for this. We are at 128 by 128, and what we did in the interaction is we set up this UI to be 50 by 50. Now we have the image size here, which is 128 by 128, and we can change this to 50 by 50, but we also have to change these XY, because you notice that it doesn't really change size. We have to do that here to tell it to be a certain size for us. We can do that. Let's go to play, and you can see it lines up correctly. And we need to set this up with two text widgets. One is going to be for the center here to make sure that this is the button we press for interacting. And the other one is just going to be a description that sits right below it. Now I'm going to use a vertical box that allows us to add widgets and layer them in order from top to bottom. Because we have this one always above the one underneath it, the description, it works for us really well. So we can search for it, vertical box, let's drop that in. We also need to add in the text, so we're going to add in two text. And we also are going to need an overlay. Now you can do this a couple different ways. You can use things like a border, but I find the overlays a little bit nicer just because we don't have to change this image size. This image size is what we want it to be, and we don't want the text block to kind of change that. And we can't just add it to the image because images don't take children. There's nothing that we can layer on top of it. So if I try, it just won't let us. Whereas you can put things inside the vertical box, and so on. So we need an overlay. This will allow us to stack them nicely. We can just drop it here for now. And we need to add them all to the vertical box. So let's do that. I'm going to add the overlay first. The image is going to go inside the overlay. So is the first text. And then the second one will go back into the vertical box. So you can see it layers them from top to bottom. Now the next thing I want to do is just reset all these defaults, make it pop back up here, the vertical box and everything, to the corner. So we can do that just over here by hitting these defaults. And then we want to resize it. So we can put in, let's try 150 here. We want enough room across that our text won't run out of room, our description. And we can go down like 100 will be fine. Now for this overlay, we are going to center it, and we want the image to also be centered. Same thing with the text. And we can change this text to be the key that we need it to be. We'll center it in both sides, image, center both ways. The overlay itself can stay up top. We want it to be at the very top, vertically aligned. Although it probably won't matter with the vertical box, it'll always keep it up here no matter what. So you can keep it on each. I don't think it will actually change anything. Text, same thing. We can just keep it fill, really. You can keep it in the center if you'd like. If you want it to be, make sure it's centered. And we're going to change this to description. And change this to be something more like 16 or 12. Something like that will be fine. Now, before I move on, I like to rename all of my objects. We need to rename them, and we need to also change a few to be variables. So let's do it. Canvas panel is the main big panel that you're always using, so I'm just going to call this main. Vertical box, I like to say VB, and we're going to call this one UI container. UI container. Overlay is going to be just an O, and then we're going to say button overlay. Image, same thing. We're going to use the I and say button. We can say background, button back. Text is going to be button text, and then description will be button description. Now the button description in particular is the one that we really need to set as a variable, because this will for sure change based on every single subclass we create or individual object if you have to do changes by hand. So we want to make sure that this is a variable. We're going to compile save. And the next thing we want to do is just for the padding is make sure that the top of the button, or the top of the description, the bottom of the button, are not really like right next to each other. They're not touching. So we can put in like 5 or 10, not on bottom, on top. And you can see it kind of pops down. And just kind of make sure there's a little bit of space for it, so they're not just directly on top of each other. Now that I've added this is variable, if we go to the event graph, you can actually see it's here in our variables. The other stuff, like we do have the image here, although we don't necessarily need the image as a variable. It probably is automatically created as one. We can uncheck that. But if you need these to be variables to change them out in the event graph, go for it. We're not going to worry about it. We're always going to use the same key and the same image back for everything. Now that we've done this, and we have enough room for the description to kind of get bigger or smaller, we can select it and we can say auto wrap to make sure that it doesn't just end up going off screen. It'll wrap around the second line. We need to go back into this interaction parent though and change it to these sizes, so 150 by 100. So we're going to say 150 by 100. This is selecting the interact UI and in the draw size. Now if we try it, here's our description, there's our key, and it makes sense. We can use this to pretty much tell the player what they're going to do with any given interaction. So we have this, but how do we update this description? We can do this through the binding if we would like. That would mean we don't necessarily need this to be a variable. We can just change it. And whenever this gets updated through our function, we are all set. It's awesome, it works. I like to do things through a function though, so it's kind of up to you. This will create a function, but it's specific to that bind. I'm going to create my own function for this. So I'm going to add a new function called set interact description. File save, and when we select it, we can add a new input. So let's go to new input, and we're going to call this a text variable. This is our description, and we're going to pass it from our interactions to the UI when we create that. Because the description doesn't really need to be updated more than once, it's very easy just to call it once at the beginning and be done with it. Let's go ahead. Let's control and drag out the button description, and we're just going to drag out a line and say set text. We want to say set text text. We're going to plug in this to the description and compile save. Now inside the interaction parent, we have to call this. But we can't really set it in the UI setup here. For whatever reason, the way that this is set up, the widget component really doesn't get created until playtime, meaning we have to do it in the event graph under begin play. So once the level is loaded, this UI will actually be created as a object we can interact with and update. So we're going to right click an empty space in the event graph, say begin play. Comment it real quick. So begin play, update, UI. And all we want to do is drag out our UI and say get widget, get user widget object. And this will get the actual widget object as opposed to this widget component. And here we can cast to our interaction UI. Again, this one is from my demo earlier. We're going to connect these up, and we're going to set interaction description. Now we already created an interaction description here in the previous tutorials. So we can drag one out and use this right away. This is available to our level designers, so it's editable. but you can create a default in here for each individual subclass so that you don't have to type it in every time. So every time we create a subclass, we can update this so it automatically is something else. So this will come through, set the text, and our description will change. By default, it's called interact, so let's see if that worked. So now it says interact instead of description. Again, it's not very helpful to our players, but because this is the parent class and won't really do anything, it's perfect. So that about does it for the UI. Our UI is all set and ready to go. We can close out of it and close out of our parent. Now that's cool, we have everything set up for our parent class, but we really can't have it do anything yet. So let's kind of change that. Let's create something that actually occurs. We're going to create the light switch subclass. Now, you can do this a couple different ways. We can right-click and say create child blueprint class right on our parent class. This is the easiest and great way to do it. Let's go ahead and click it. And we're going to rename this to interaction underscore switch. It'll be our switch class. Now, let's say that we wanted to do it a different way. If we right-click, we can also go to blueprint class, and we can go under all classes, and we can search for interaction parent. And here we have this interaction parent class. This is the one we created, and we can gain access to it to say this is the parent class for this one. So as you do it for all of these, it's the same kind of concept. We're inheriting everything from actor if we choose that, same thing with pawn or character. We're just taking it the next step by using our own custom classes. So let's go ahead and open up this interaction switch. So now that it's open, we can see that we have everything from our parent class already added in. We have the icon, the mesh, the trigger, everything, the UI inherited. And in the construction script, we have the construction and the call to our parent class, which means that if we double click it, we open up the parent, and here's where this all is being called. The idea being that we actually call all of this code automatically from that node, parent construction script. Now afterward, we can do different things, whatever we need, but it saves us from having to redo any of that code. Inside the event graph, we can go ahead and just delete these out for now. We'll get back to them soon. But we have everything that we need for this class to work, just from the standpoint of the same functionality as our parent class. If we go up to our class defaults, we're able to change any of the default things that we need for our class, including all those variables that our parent has. Now, we have access to those variables, but they don't sit in our variables section here. We can still call them, so I can say get trigger radius, and it'll still pop up, and I can still use it. We just don't have access to it right here. We can still get and set everything like normal. But for now, what we want to do is change a few of these options real quick. And we're going to go ahead and let's drag out a switch to put on the wall here. And when I do that, this is still really big compared to what a switch should be. We're not going to really make it like a actual switch that moves. We're just going to make it turn on and off with different materials. But we still don't want it this big. What we can do is open up our mesh transform, and let's start changing the scale. I'm going to put this down to something like 0.025, 0.25, 0.25, compile, save. And it looks like these are not updating, so let's go here to our mesh transform where it's all the previous. We hit that little back button. It'll kind of update to our current defaults. That is to note that if you now add in the next one, it'll be correct by default. So we can do something like this. Let's save. This works. Our interact is super high up, so we gotta change that. Our interaction offset, UI location. Let's just do it by, let's try 50, or even 25 would be enough. 25, and we would want it to be forward. Now, by default, our forward is X that way. So if we put in 25, let's put like 10 forward, file save. If we go to our object view instead of world, this is X forward, same thing with the world. So let's turn it 180 degrees so that our object's X forward is this way. Now that means when we have this X forward amount, it's going to be pushed forward based on that object rotation. So it'll be a little bit sticking out this way, and then just a little bit up for the, oh whoops, this is the mesh transform. I meant this one. The UI location. Now, again, let's double check here. Let's see, it looks like this one is working, this one's fine too. They're to the defaults of that class. Now, we have this where the UI is a little bit forward so it doesn't run into the wall, and we can interact with it. Perfect. The trigger should be fine. I'm not going to make it any smaller for now. You guys can if you would like, but the idea is that you can change all of these defaults, and whenever you add the object then to the world, they'll take on those defaults. One thing I may do for the mesh transform in this is the X value. Let's drop this down slightly more to like 125, so it's like a flat button. More like this. And again, you can play around with it to get whatever you need. The idea is that you probably wouldn't be using just a cube. You would make a new mesh that is specific for that light switch, or whatever kind of switch you need it to be. Now that we've added this in, we need to create some sort of interaction for this object, for this subclass. Right now it doesn't do anything, it's just the parent. And the parent, if we go to our interact, does nothing except this print string. So what we want to do is the same, we want to use this code to get this interact character, and then we want to turn things on and off. Now if you don't need the interact character, you could leave that part out, but I like to keep it just in case I do need it later. It's valuable information, it doesn't take a lot of extra time to pass that. So inside our switch, we can go to override, and we're going to find our interact. We're going to click that, and it's going to add in our interact function, but it's going to be inside of our event graph. It's going to kind of appear like a event instead of a function call, which is okay. We can do more with it this way, so it works out well. And we can right-click and say call to parent function. Now if you don't call it to parent function, it won't do any of this. It will skip over that parent code, which is useful when you don't want it to actually do that. You may want to augment it in some way. Instead, you may want to grab this variable and have it set to something specific here instead of the person interacting with it. But in our cases, we don't. We want that to be the same. So I'm going to comment, and we're going to drag this down and give ourselves some room. And we kind of have to think about what we need this light switch to do. And it could be anything. It might not just be a light switch. It could be just a switch in general that we can apply to different things. And the first thing we want to do is create a variable that will determine whether this is on or off. So we can create a Boolean. We're going to name this to be active. And we can compile save. We're going to drag and drop it in. Use the get. Hold the B key and click to do a branch. It's a quick shortcut, which is nice. And we want to flip-flop it pretty much. We want to say, okay, if we're active and we've interacted with it, we're turning it off. if it isn't active and we're going through here, we're going to turn it on. And to make that even easier, we can say not. This way it's kind of like a, if we're off, we're going to go through the true. If we're on, we're going to go through the false. If we hold the Alt key, we can drag out a set. We're going to copy paste. We're going to split these up and connect them. So what will happen is, say, we interact with the object, and it's going to say if we're not active, if we're inactive, we're going to say, okay, true, we're going to activate you. If we are active, we're going to go to false and deactivate. Now that we have this kind of switch mentality, we can use this to do a couple things really quickly. And the first one is to just change out the material on our mesh. We can drag out our mesh. We're going to drop this in. We're going to drag a line that says set material. And we'll do the same thing for the bottom one. We can copy and paste or just connect it directly. Either way works, but keep it this way. And the material that we currently have right now is the cube asset, I believe. If we select it, yeah, cube material. And for this one, let's change it to be that gold that I had in the demo. Make sure that gets hooked up. So now it'll turn, if it's active, we're actually going to turn this to the gold. Whoops. We're going to say gold. This one's going to be cube when it's inactive. Now it's going to start inactive right now, but what we can do is turn this to editable so that the player or the designer can go in and change if it's starting off as on or off during the level. We'll have to set this up in the construction script to run this and check to see which one it should set these interactions as at first. But for now, it's okay. We'll get to that. Now that we go up to it, we can interact. It turns gold and back to normal. All right, cool. But what else do we need to do? It would be best if we have the option to tell the player what they're doing with this. Instead of saying interact, we want to say turn on or turn off. So let's do that as well. Inside our parent, we have this interaction UI being called and set up. And what we can do is we can create a variable to hold this information. So let's do that. Let's drag out, say promote to variable. We're going to plug it in here, here, we're going to delete that line, plug it in here. This variable we can change. We can call this one our interaction UI widget because it's the actual widget itself. We'll save and compile, and back in our child class we're going to actually get access to that. So we can say get interaction widget. Here's our variable. If we right click on it, we can say convert to validated, which means that we make sure that it does exist before we start trying to use it, which is very useful. And in here we can set description. So our interact description, copy paste it to the bottom, and every time we update, we're going to change this description. Now, for now, let's just say this one's turn off, and that's because once we hit this state, we're in the on state now. This one's going to be turn on. And then we need to go to our class defaults, and instead of interact description being this, we're going to set this to be turn on. So it starts as default. Right, walk into it. It doesn't look like it updated it. And I wonder why. Oh, that's why. So if we select it, we need to reset that. It didn't like it. But normally, yeah, it spawns that way, which is nice. Let's try it one more time. We get here, we say turn on, it says turn off, turn on, turn off. It looks like the text wrapped, even though it shouldn't. So we can take a look at that as well. Back in our content browser, let's open this up. This description is auto-wrapping a little bit too much. I'm going to center it. It should have plenty of room for a turn on and turn off. Auto-wrap should just do it once we hit that side, but I don't think we would normally. Believes we do. For now, let's turn this off. We'll have to go in and start wrapping the text at a certain spot. But that works. That's good. Now, this is where we can actually have the switch do more than just change out the material. And that's going to be through things like the event dispatchers. Now, the event dispatchers are pretty easy to set up, but they're a little kind of crazy at the end of the day compared to some other methods I like. But they're really good for talking to the level blueprint. There's no way to access the level blueprint directly from something like this. We just don't know what exists in there before we actually are running it, or depending on what level we're in. So event dispatches are the way to kind of create those events to happen in there from an object like this. So we're going to say event dispatcher. We're going to add a new one in called turned on, or we could actually change this to activate and inactive. Activate, and we'll say deactivate. So we can drag out, and when we release, it's going to have a big list of things we could do. And right now, we're just going to call it. The idea being that the activate and deactivate, if they do exist in a level, they're just going to be called. It's going to call any of these that are referencing it, this object and this event. One thing to notice, we don't have this hooked up, so if we do not have a UI for some reason, we can still pass this through and make sure that at the very least, our call to the event dispatcher still works. So let's do that. We're just adding lines in, and I'm rerouting with a double click, just to make it look a little nicer. So that's about it for this. Let's create something in the level to have happen. Now, previously in the demo, I showcased a bridge that would kind of extend across here that would let the players move from one point to the other. Let's do that again real quick. It's pretty easy to set up. If you don't know anything about Matinee, check that out on the Unreal documentation. I'm going to kind of gloss over it as we go. So the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to go find a mesh. So I'm going to use the cube. I wonder, can we use the template floor? Let's see. Template floor might work pretty well. So let's use that. You can use the cube or anything like that if you'd like. And I'm going to check this. 0.09, and it's like perfect. We might want a little bit of an overlap, but I think it'll be fine actually. Now, I'm going to set this up a little bit off and out of the way, so we can't see it until it extends out and hits here. You could put a hole in here or something if you'd like. I don't really care for this. So let's go and save it, and the one thing I want to do with this object is make sure that we can move it. And by default, static meshes are static. We want to check this to make sure it's a movable object. And next I'm going to create a matinee. So cinematics, add matinee, it's going to bring one up. If I minimize it real quick, you'll see that this actor is here. This is our matinee actor. I'm just going to kind of put it around where this event takes place. If I bring back up the matinee, I'm going to close out of it real quick. Close out the rest of this real quick. Save. And we're just going to change this to matinee underscore bridge. And this object here, our bridge part, we can say sag mesh bridge. Alright, back in the matinee. If we hit open matinee, we can bring that up again, and we need to do a few things to get this object moving. And the first thing is to add it to our track list. So up here we have curves, which I can actually drag down here and put it next to the tracks. We want to be in the tracks section. We're not going to be using the curve editor right now. And we need to right click and say new empty group. And we're going to call this one the bridge. This is our bridge group. And by default, there's nothing really in it. Let's select your bridge, right click on it, say actors, say add selected actors. Actually, I think it did have it in there automatically when we created. But cool, if you didn't, go ahead and add it. And we want to right click and say new movement track. So this is what will allow us to move it and keyframe where we want it to start and end. By default, it's going to keyframe its initial position, which is great for us. And I'm going to move this black bar. This is our timeline and where we want our time to change to. We're going to say it takes 3 seconds to move this. The little red part here, I'm going to move back. It's going to bring everything. That's our starting and ending point. Now, when we select a keyframe, you'll see that it says adjust keyframe down here and keyframe here. That means that when we move our object, it's going to update its location for this frame specifically. So I can just drag it out. And when I release it, you'll see that yellow line gets added in to show that movement. And we can scrub through and it will show how this movement works. This looks good. If we do this and then if we reverse it, it looks like the drawbridge is coming out and then retracting. So we can close and save. If you try and save with the matinee open, it does not let you. You have to close out of it first. But, so we're just imagining this is an event in a level. We've created a way for the player to progress. They need to just get to point A where there's a switch, activate the switch, and it will open up a route for them. We created a matinee to create this bridge movement. We need to call it. So inside our blueprints here, we have the open level blueprint. And we need to select our matinee and our object here and add them to it. So we can do the matinee first, select it and right click and say create a reference. And create a reference to this matinee. And same thing with our switch. Right click, say create reference to switch. Now the way that event dispatchers work, they do have certain options for different ways to set this up, but the way I like to set it up is through the begin play, and I'm going to I'm going to bind that event dispatcher to an event here. So we can do, say, bind event to activate and deactivate. So here's our bind event to activate and deactivate for our switch. If we do this here, and we'll do the same thing right next to it. Bind event to deactivate. And they give us these little boxes. And this is just an event that we can create. So what we need to do is drag off a line and say custom event, and we can name this one activate bridge. And same thing with the other one will be the deactivate. Custom and with our matinee, we're just playing and reversing. So let's play, and when we hit this one, reverse. And we'll hook these up and save. Now, when we hit the begin play, we're going to run through and say bind these events to our activate and deactivate. So whenever this event dispatcher is called, it automatically knows in the level blueprint, hey, this event gets called alongside of it. Now, one thing I like to do to keep everything organized is to actually move this away from just the begin play. You can kind of collapse this graph too, that works as well. Or you can call another custom function and kind of keep this in its own separate area. So if I make a custom event and we're going to call this find bridge. Now we can move this anywhere we want it, we can collapse the graph, we can do whatever we want with it, and all we have to do is call this from the begin play. So from here, we just say bind bridge, and whenever the level starts up, we're just going to bind it right away and leave it for later. This just makes it easier, so you can do all of your begin play stuff, anything else that you have, and not have to worry about having a bunch of random stuff all over the place. Keeps everything more organized and just makes sure we don't go overboard with wires going everywhere. Now that we've done it, let's see if it works. Turn it on, interacted, our bridge opens. We go to turn off, our bridge closes. Awesome. Now, if I open up our parent class and go to our interact, we could go ahead and disable this interacted. That's up to you if you want to leave it on there for now as we're building it, but that means we don't have this text popping up anymore. And it works. Now, adding functionality to this is really, really easy. If we want, for example, a sound to play, we can do that as well. Let's go ahead and add a sound to our switch. Play sound at location is fine. We don't necessarily need to attach it because we're not moving the switch. So if you are moving the switch, let's say it's like attached to something that moves, it might be better to attach it. Or let's just do attached. Let's say play sound attached. We're going to copy and paste, one for activating, the other one for deactivating. And what we can do is go say show engine content, and let's do like the compile start and compile failed kind of thing. Compiled start, compiled failed. That's for inactive is the failed, starting is the active. And I think I forgot to attach it to our, to the components. And the best one right now for us is just the mesh. So let's attach it to the mesh. File save. And it plays. You could do this for pretty much all of your interactions if you'd like. In fact, anything that requires a sound to be interacted with, we can actually add to our parent. We could actually add a sound here. Because I don't know if all of our interactions would have specific sounds for when they are interacted with, I'm going to leave it out and do it per instance instead. But that's up to you. Making changes here still will always affect your children. So even if you realize later on that you need something in all of your classes that you started making here, all you have to do is transfer that code and kind of condense it into a single thing that you can use here and change per instance, like we do with the variables. Now, before I move on, I like to add in a couple of these as variables. I'm just going to go ahead and promote them all. You guys don't have to, but I recommend making sure that you add in different variables for all these different things. I'm going to go ahead and change this one out. And we're going to do it for the description as well. I'll save. Alright, let's rename them. So variable 1, this one's going to be an active material. So it's going to be active material. Activate sound. And then finally, the text. Because we are deactivating this part of it, we want to say, hey, the next thing you're going to do is deactivate. This one's going to be activate text. We can compile and save. You'll notice that it does keep all those in there, which is nice, and we should be all set. Now, something that we did do is set this active and allow the player to change it. This is like the default state of our switch. And what we want to do is when we change this in the level editor, have it actually do something. Because right now, if we activate or deactivate it, it really doesn't do anything. We also have this in the default, and what we could do is move this to like the setup. Or we could do a new thing called switch category. Activate, all these can be in the switch. File save. And we need to set up this activate to really do anything. In the construction script, after we do all of our initial construction, we can figure out if we should be activating or not. So if I hold the B key, I can hit branch. It's just holding B and clicking. And we want to say, okay, if we're active, we want to do the activation code. If we're not active, we will not do it. And it's pretty much everything that we have here. But we don't really want to have to redo this code and copy paste. The better way to do it is actually to create these as functions now. There's nothing in it that is reliant on being in the event graph, so we can right click and say collapse function and call this one activate. Activate switch, and we're going to take this one and say deactivate. Inside each of these, let's just make sure they're all cleaned up. We can comment them. And now that we have those in functions, we can go to the construction script and we can say activate and deactivate right away. And we want to make sure that it's the same. We're not doing the opposite. We are doing straight up activate. So set it to active, which is interesting because we could hear that sound when it activates. Now, if you don't want to hear that sound, you might want to instead change this, remove some of these things. The one thing about this sound in particular, this compile, is it might have no attenuation. So it doesn't actually fall off. This is a sound from the editor. It has no fall off point, so it doesn't really feel like it's in the world. So you may want to change that to something else, or duplicate that, put it in your own content, because you don't want to change it from the editor part. You'd rather put it in here and save it and make sure it's your own stuff then, all of your updates. But for now, I don't really mind. So once I go here, we can go to turn on, turn off. If I go ahead and I change it and say active at first, you can see that it's here. When I press play, I go up to it. Looks like the text did not change though. And let's see why. Now our text, when we're hitting this inside the construction script, we're going to get nothing for this. It's going to say that this is not valid right now because it's not been created. So back in our event graph, we need to change that. And if we go to our parent class, we can go hit this little button. Actually, I wonder if this opens it. Yeah, it does. That's cool. And we go to our event graph here, this begin play stuff. We can actually set this up as a function. So we're going to right click, collapse to function. We're going to say set widget text, yes. And we can change this from the default to the setup category. Inside here, it's the same thing. We are just saying we're setting it to be this description. And the reason why I put it in a function is because it's really easy to override then in our next child class. So, back in our switch, we can do a new override for this set widget text. Instead of overriding the begin play or anything like that, we just really want to change this one. And really, the only thing we want to do differently is pick what we're going to be doing here. So instead of doing a call to the parent class, because we're fundamentally changing how it works, we're going to copy and paste the code and completely override that function. So the parent code will not be called because we are not doing a call to the parent here. We're leaving that out. Alright, instead of using the interact description for it, we're actually going to use the Boolean to select which one we're picking. So let's go to our switch, we're going to drag out this active, and we're going to use a select. So we can type in select from this description, and it will give us a select for our text. And we can drag in and hit this as the index. And we should be good. Now, we're just going to put in the active or inactive here. So if we are active, we want it to be true. We're active, we want the active text. Or actually, we want the inactivate text. We want it to say turn off when we get to it. So we're going to do deactivate for true, meaning it's active already, and the other way around for the inactive. Looks like my guy disappeared. And my construction script is going a little crazy. It's spawning sounds like over and over again. Yeah. So because of that, we're having some weird sound stuff. And in the construction script, I mean, we don't really want to do anything, I guess, except for these two. So let's do that. In our construction, we're going to get rid of that. We're going to just paste this in for the active, and then copy paste for the inactive, and change out the inactive material. which means that now we don't have any crazy sounds being spawned every 2 seconds while we move it. But it still works. The only thing you'll have to worry about is checking to see that our drawbridge is out because it's already active. And that's really kind of like a level thing. What you can do if you want it to be active then is say, okay, we're going to set its current position, or we're going to, let's see what position this is. This would be at 3, so 3 seconds in. So we could say 3 seconds in, start position, play on level load, meaning that our level starts with it out. And now when we go to turn off, it reverses and everything's great. Normally, if you know this is going to be active already or something weird like that for some odd reason, you can always just have it start out, and then the matinee is the part where it plays going back in, reverse brings it back out. But for now, I'm just going to reset all that, and we're going to reset this to inactive. But yeah, looks good. At this time, we have everything set up for our switch. It can technically do anything we need it to. And before we're done, I'm going to show you a little bit about the blueprint interfaces. But I won't do it this time. I'm going to do it kind of all at the end instead, just to save time on this video. But everything should be set up for that switch. And that about wraps it up for this tutorial. Next time we're going to be going over the other two interactions. I might split those up into separate videos. We're going to make an elevator, and we're also going to make a pickup. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.